You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
Chapter 4. Comatose. Monday morning, he took the bus straight to the hospital and was shown around the department by Dr. Charleston. He was introduced to the other doctors and staff and then told of the patients he would be involved with. At the time, there were 5 cases. 3 had been there for a good many weeks, and the other 2 had been admitted on the last 2 consecutive evenings. All had been identified, bar 1. This was a middle-aged man who had been the victim of a hit-and-run near the city center, and he carried no identification. The police had called in to question him on a couple of occasions, but the man had remained unconscious. He had severe head wounds, a broken right leg, and fractures to his right forearm, and the car driver was unknown. The only witness who came forward was a woman who was waiting at the Cambridge bus stop, quite near to the scene of the accident. She remembered the man walking rather jerkily and looking behind him. Then it all happened, quickly. A large dark car, as she described it, turned the corner to her right out of Downing Street. It had taken the corner very wide, almost over to the far side of the main street. It was quite late in the evening, with few cars or pedestrians about. The car continued in a wide circle and mounted the pavement about 10 yards beyond her, hitting the man as he began running, as if he was expecting it to happen. She then said the man crumpled on the near side wing of the car and was flung over with considerable force, hitting his head on the pavement. Her statement to the police continued. She said the strange thing was the car certainly didn't seem out of control and appeared to hit him intentionally. It only just missed her at the bus stop. The car then sped away, turning into Emmanuel Street toward the bus station. Another person who by now had come across the scene was a young lad, and it was he who had phoned for the ambulance from the box just across the road. She ended her statement by saying that a small group of people had gathered around with the stricken man, thought to be dead. This was the only eyewitness account of what had happened. The woman had insisted on traveling with the man to the hospital, where she gave police and doctors the full story. The whole case of this mystery man and his assailants intrigued Mark, who was told the sequence of events by the doctor who had received him in casualty. He was then taken to see the man. Monitoring electrodes sprouted from his head and chest, attached to the EEG and ECG machines. A massive contusion on the man's temple was being attended to by a nurse. He had survived, only just. As Mark well knew, the next 24 hours were crucial. All that week he was assigned to this patient, taking care to note down any changes in his condition shown by the monitors. The man survived the critical period, but would probably exist only in a life of unconsciousness. Could there be a chance that he might recover and be able to solve the mystery? He hoped so. The police only called once more, as it was obvious that the man was unable to be of any help. The next day the mystery patient and all the equipment were moved into a private room where Mark was able to concentrate on the emergency paper printouts from the 2 main monitors, one for various brain functions and the other for heart response. A nurse came in 3 times a day to provide liquid nourishment via a nasal tube to his stomach. A careful watch was also made on his blood glucose levels by taking blood samples twice a day. The police asked to be contacted if he was in any state to communicate with them. Obviously, it seemed most likely as things stood. It was exactly a week since Mark had started work at the hospital when he began to notice a small detail on the man's CRT monitor waveform. All the information was produced as a hard copy on graph paper, so it could be scrutinized at leisure. But he went straight to it as it churned out of the printer. They were there. He hadn't imagined them, as he had feared for hours of staring at the readouts. What he had seen he couldn't make sense of. They just should not have been there. He certainly hadn't seen anything like it in all his months of training in London. The brain function trace modulations definitely showed a parasitic secondary inflection on the amplitude waveform, a small wave within a wave. As he had never come across anything like it before, Mark thought it wise to check all the equipment and connections to the patient, although he was sure it couldn't be that, as the patient was too regular and only appeared on the ascending limps of the waveform. He decided not to mention it to Dr. Charleston, for it was a problem he wanted to sort out himself. Once he had done that, he could explain it to him. But what on earth was causing it? One evening he was lying on his bed back at the flat, thinking over how this phenomenon could possibly occur. It was then that he remembered that it was only occurring at certain periods during the day. He leapt up and stared out the window across the chimney pots, positively locked in deep thought. Suddenly he realized it was only happening during REM sleep, the times when a person is dreaming, causing the eyes to move around under the eyelids. What was he dreaming about? That was the crucial question. He could be reliving his recent past, and the solution to the mystery could be locked away inside his head. Mark began to think of his experience with computers at the London hospitals. Whenever he had the time, he set about trying to solve the problem of somehow interpreting these micro-modulations. The first step was obvious, well, at least to him. He needed to amplify the small waveforms into a larger, more detailed image. Within a fortnight, he had built a device which, according to his calculations, should link to the electroencephalograph output to produce a greatly amplified signal. More than that, it would also record them as a digitized signal onto magnetic tape. It became a familiar sight within the department to see Mark pushing trolley loads of equipment to and from the physics lab and into the neurology ward. During a reasonably quiet period in the ward, Mark tested out his device suitably wired up to the stranger's EEG readout terminals. In fact, he could have done it at any time because his projects were virtually incomprehensible to anyone else. It was his guilty conscience niggling at him because he hadn't told Charleston or anyone else about what he was doing. Through headphones, he could hear the evidence that his device did actually work. The REM sleep micromodulations were now stored in his device. He had some data now, which he could get to work back at the flat. He decided he would leave his box connected for as long as possible for each of the REM sleep periods of dreaming to enable him to collect many hours of data. The next stage was to decode the signals into a more useful state, which necessitated spending long hours in the physics department's library, hunting for some computer-aided means to transpose data in digital form, which could then be explored in more detail than it could ever be in its raw EEG state.